Welcome to the Easton School Committee meeting of Thursday, May 21st, 2020. This is a meeting on the Zoom platform. And if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A and we'll get to it. All right, the minutes of April 30th. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or corrections?
This is Jen Starr. I have one correction, Lynn, on page 3. This is the second to last paragraph where it notes second line up, Jackie Gottwald. So her last name is spelled Gottwald. And other than that, I had no comments.
Anyone else? Questions, comments, or corrections? No. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Durant.
Second. Star.
Okay, all those in favor? Caroline? Just raise your hand. Okay.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, next, discussion of district sports. Dr. Cabral.
Thank you. We have obviously been talking a great deal about the budget and the anticipated shortfall in state revenue. As part of those conversations, we discussed in executive session some guidance that I will revisit a bit later when we get to budget review. But one of the items was to look at potential savings within the sports department. So Athletic Director Bill Matthews and OA Principal Wes Paul are here to provide some information to you and answer any questions you may have as well. Mr. Matthews?
I took a very, very close look at the spending that we had for this past year and the prior year, along with my assistant, Mary Flavin. I am proud to say that we don't have a lot of things that we purchase that are excess or unneeded. You scrub through there and you go, okay, there's a little bit here and a little bit there that we can tweak, but we did find some areas. In terms of going into next year, one of the areas that we do benefit from is that we had some carryover of items that were purchased in the spring that weren't used, and we won't have to repurchase them next year. You know, all of the equipment, balls, baseball, softball, those types of things. There was about $5,600 in that equipment that we won't have to purchase next year. And we did pre-fund arbiter pay, which is one of the, it's the way that we pay our game officials. And we had deposited the money for the spring sports. It remains on account. So that money will be used for the fall sports. So that is in the amount of $13,000. And then like trainer supplies would be one of the other things, maybe $1,000 to $1,500 there. So those are things that we didn't use in the spring that we'll be able to use. That totals about $20,000 going into next year. And then as we look at the other areas, I just group this as like either delay the purchase, it's a cost reduction, or something that may be non-recurring. Without getting into a great deal of detail, it would be like equipment, it would be coach training, it would be the delay of purchase of uniforms, those types of things. And then that would total about $35,000. Those are things that sometime in the future, they're going to have to be purchased. We have, like the basketballs or volleyballs or those things. I think that we can get through another year. At some point, you do have to replace those, so that it's not like a permanent reduction, but I think it's something that we can pull out for next year. So as I said, that would total about, $16,000, $16,000 or $17,000. And then one other area that we've been exploring, and this hasn't been approved yet, so this is probably even a surprise to Wes. We haven't had an opportunity to talk about it, but in the Hockomock League, one of the things that the principals have asked us to do as athletic directors is to create an emergency fund with our Hockomock League dues, so that in the case of a crisis, that we could fund the league without necessarily having the full payment from each school. The athletic directors have gone through where our budget is, where our emergency fund is, and we're going to propose that our Hockomock dues, which for Oliver Ames would typically be $11,000 a year, would be to cut that in half this year. So that would be, for us, it would be about a $5,500 savings. So between the equipment and materials not used and the delay of purchase or putting some of the things off, we're at about $42,000 in a reduction from where we would have been or where we would be for spending from this year. So that was really where our starting point was. And, you know, I would open it up for any questions that you might have at this point in time.
Is that entire total is made up of one-time expenses, or is any of that longitudinal? Or
there's a very, very small portion of that
Okay.
that would be something that would be a longer term saving. It has to do, like, one of the items in there is the Norfolk Power tractor rental for turf grooming. With the new equipment that we're actually purchasing for the turf,
right,
that tractor rental is no longer necessary. That was $1,500, but
right.
the other
Purchased
thing,
with a donation. It was purchased by a donation, the machine.
correct.
Right. Okay, but that's 1,500. Okay.
Yeah.
So we should consider this a one-time stopgap to get us through next year.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question. On the spreadsheet that we got, it said average equals $413 at $5,000 estimated booster paid bus cost added. What does that mean?
I don't know. That may have been a part of a worksheet that got copied in that may not have been.
It was
relevant.
on page, yeah, it was on page 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
just that's a note for yourself.
Yes, you know, part of what we did is put together analysis on all of the sports, what costs per sport, what the expense is, what the revenue is from the activity fees, the net cost per athlete. We did a really thorough analysis on that. I think approximately 2 years ago. So I use that as a reference point just to look at, you know, where the expenses go, where the cost per athlete. We did a lot of analysis on that, but that wasn't something that I meant to provide at this time.
I didn't know what it meant. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And for the most part, I think we got this information before, but there's what, like 20% of the kids don't have to pay activity fees. Is that correct?
I think that's directionally correct, but I don't know that for sure.
We're at about 16% district-wide right now.
Okay.
One of the reasons, you know, we tend to talk about things like fees when we're discussing budget shortfalls because it is a potential source of revenue. However, we're finding it particularly difficult with the current situation because Easton's unemployment rate is at 24% right now, and we're not really sure where that's going to be in the fall. So that is very different than what we've had for qualifying recipients in past years. It is possible that if we raise fees, first of all, it's going to be much more difficult for people facing difficulty, but many more people we are predicting are going to qualify for free or reduced participation. And so raising fees is at best, we think, going to create a flat income. At worst, we think we're going to be losing money as it is. So raising fees per se for next year may be a moot point until we know what kind of bounce back the economy is going to have. It's going to be very hard to predict if we raise anything that there's any confidence it will result in a savings, is my point.
And I have one more question on uniforms. You were talking about uniforms. Do the athletes get let's say they're playing football, they get a uniform. Do they use that uniform every year that they play, or do they get a new one every year? How does that work?
Our uniforms, for the most part, excluding things like swim, our uniforms would be on a 6-year cycle.
Okay,
So our goal is to have those uniforms in place for 6 years. And what I've tried to do is create a system where we have approximately the same amount that we spend each year in uniforms. And one of the things that I should point out is that we do get great support from our boosters on that.
right.
We have a system where the school department pays half of the cost of the uniforms and our boosters pay half, which is a godsend that they're able to do that. But our portion of it on an annualized basis would run anywhere from about $6,000 to $10,000 in uniforms just to keep on that 6-year cycle for uniforms.
Thank you.
So I don't know how much more in depth you guys want to get, but one of the things that I would point out is when you think about the overall athletic budget, the coach stipends make up approximately $250,000 of the entire budget. So the three big drivers really are the coach stipends. The buses are about 150,000, and then the officials, the game officials, are at about 50,000. So you've got $450,000 that are made up of those particular expenses, and then it drops way off in terms of what the actual expense would be for individual items. But those are the big drivers behind the athletic budget. So when you look at where do you trim if you have to make cuts, it really is eliminating the positions, if you will, or eliminating sports, which then eliminates the officials, the buses, and the coaching positions on it.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Sure. So wondering, and I can imagine the answer is the same as when people ask us what school will look like in the fall. Has MIAA, what are they thinking? Any thoughts on what athletics could possibly look like in the fall?
If you answer the question about what school will look like first, I'll answer what sports will look like.
Yeah.
We're optimistic. I think that people are really anxious to get back not only to school but to athletic competition. But we're just now forming work groups at the MIAA and on the, if you will, regional level, the district down, South Shore area with athletic directors. We have formed work groups and have started the process of identifying the key things that have to happen in order for us to go back, and then what it will look like. So unfortunately, I don't really have a good picture of what that looks like at this point in time. And I think one of the things that we're challenged by, as you guys are, is that decisions come from a higher place, the governor's office, et cetera, and we'll all be affected by that. So I think everybody's kind of looking up to wait to see what they're going to do, but we're trying to plan at our level to think about what could happen and to be prepared for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Caroline, go ahead.
Caroline, can you talk into the phone?
So I know there's a lot of discussion by.
Caroline, if you mute, I'm sorry. Caroline, if you mute your computer, that will help. There you go.
Does that help? Okay. There's a lot of discussion about having no attendees.
No. Hold on.
Hold it to your face.
Can you hear me at all now?
Yes.
Much better, yes.
It's echoing though. So there's a lot of discussion by professional sports managers and so on about having things like football with no attendees. So I'm just wondering what our gate receipts are and what kind of implications that kind of model would have for us. I know that you're just beginning these discussions, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are initially.
I think that it could have a pretty negative impact on that, Caroline. I think it's a good question. I think it would probably have a bigger impact in the fall. Our only gate revenue source in the fall is football until we get to tournament. And then if we're able to host, if we're fortunate to have a good enough team in soccer or field hockey, that we get to host an early round game, we would also pick up gate revenue at that point in time. So football would be the one at risk in the fall. And then as you get into the winter, the big one is basketball. We do receive some gate receipts from hockey, but the big ones are really basketball, particularly boys basketball. And I think that, it could be dramatically negatively affected. I think less so as we move along the timeline. Our gate receipts, I'm doing this from memory, so please excuse me if I'm off a little bit, but I believe our gate revenue in the last 8 years has ranged somewhere between $38,000 and $50,000 a year. When you have those championship teams in basketball and football, the 50,000 is your number. But when you don't, it tends to be more down around the $38 to $40,000 range, if I recall right. I certainly can follow up with you on that after the meeting.
Kind of in general, what sorts of discussions were happening about that type of model. But thanks, that's fine. I mean, we don't need anything more than a ballpark, so to speak, figure.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for either Mr. Matthews or Mr. Paul? Or Mr. Carroll? Is that you, Mr. Carroll? Oh,
Mr. Carroll is here for the next conversation. He's in disguise.
He is. He looks like a bear. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You've been hibernating. Okay. And I know, Jackie, you had brought up a couple of weeks ago, I think, about the, couple of the sports are quite a cost per person. Did you want to talk about that, or are we okay?
No, I mean, I think we're going to have to think about going forward a little. It doesn't sound like raising fees is going to do what we were hoping it would do. We have to worry about not getting gate receipts now. And I think we're just going to need to figure out what we can do for some kind of savings. And I don't know what that is. I mean, we had talked about looking at the sports that were low attendance, high cost to the district. But I mean, I don't know if that's the way to go, or, I mean, I don't know.
All right. Well, it's true. I mean, this is a lot to look at, and, it's only one section of the whole school budget that we're looking at. So, all right. Well, anyone else have any questions or comments before I let people go? Chrissy, do we have anything coming in on Q&A? No? Okay. All right.
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. All right, so no other questions for Mr. Matthews or Mr. Paul at this time? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so now middle school sports communication. Dr. Cabral.
Okay, thanks. So again, athletic director, Mr. Matthews, and Easton Middle School principal, Grizzly Carroll, are here. Luke Carroll. They are here to discuss. We had some conversations, gosh, several months ago now, maybe even last year, about audits. Many of our audits that take place, and one in particular that noted we had one particular program that was not officially enveloped in the Easton Middle School, and that was the field hockey program. And so we need to in order to continue that, we need to move that into the Easton Middle School programming, where we have our coaches that are hired by the school district and so forth, just like the other school sanctioned sports. And so in order to do that in the most cost effective way, and also to realize some other savings, Mr. Matthews and Mr. Carroll have been working together very hard to look at all of the programming at the middle school in terms of sports, and they're going to report out on what they have so far and see if you are all right with them moving forward with that.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes.
You or Mr. Carroll, or both, it's fine.
Okay. So we have worked on this for quite some time, Luke and I have, and it seems like we've gone through a number of iterations with a plan, and about the time we got headed in the right direction, then something would come up, and we'd find out that maybe that plan wasn't going to work quite so well. I've also shifted my philosophy a little bit, and I know that I'll just be really, really direct about this. I know that my philosophy on it isn't exactly reflective of what Luke's philosophy is on it. I've shifted more to looking at where we are with middle school sports as what opportunities are there in the community for kids of this age. And if that opportunity exists, and we have, if you will, a shortage of fields, or if we're crushed for budget numbers, budget dollars, if we're kind of strained for our oversight resources and administration, and the sport can be offered by a youth sports group in town, if those opportunities exist, I believe that we should look at that. I think that we should look at that option. So I've made the recommendation, and I think that we ultimately have gotten to a decision that we will be eliminating the middle school soccer programs coming this fall. And the big driver behind that is the loss of our practice field up at the high school, which forces us to move practice from the practice field that's being developed down there onto the JV baseball field, which then moves the the middle school field hockey team over to Parkview, and we're short of fields. So I don't really have a place to put everyone. And I've spoken to the Easton Youth Soccer League, and they have agreed to field teams of that age, to offer competitive soccer for that age group. So I don't feel like we are taking away opportunities from these kids. I think we are shifting the responsibility for the teams to a different group in the community. So we would ultimately with this plan, we would bring field hockey in as a school-sponsored sport, and we would eliminate the soccer programs at the middle school level, and then those would go over to Easton Youth Soccer. So that would be one phase of the middle school sports program. We're also challenged on the basketball side with seventh grade. We're one of the very few schools out there that have seventh grade basketball teams and eighth grade basketball teams. So we have 4 teams that we field, and finding competitive games for those seventh graders has been a real challenge for us. And ultimately, again, looking at this from the perspective of, are the opportunities there in the community with what's going on with AAU, the youth basketball program that we have in town, Dana Barrows, all of those opportunities exist in abundance at that age group. So budgetarily, it's an advantage to eliminate the seventh grade teams. I do recommend that we keep the seventh and eighth, or keep a team for the boys and a team for the girls, so that we end up, still fielding 1 team each for those genders, and then adding a wrestling program, which would offer some new opportunities and offer opportunities for kids in an area that we don't currently have opportunities. So that ultimately is really the crux of the middle school plan that I've put forth. And I guess I'll turn it over to Alicia or to Luke, whoever would want to comment or add anything to that.
And matriculating the field hockey, of course.
Yes, the field hockey comes in-house. Instead of being school sanctioned, it now becomes school sponsored. So it's fully managed under our auspices, and it would be, it would fit what was required by the audit. That's one of the requirements, as you said, Alicia, that they had said that it either needs to be eliminated or brought in-house.
Michelle?
Bill, can you clarify for me, the one boys and one girls basketball teams that will remain, is that at the 8th grade level?
It would be 7th and 8th grade combined.
It would be 7th, 8th combined. Okay,
Yes. Yep.
thank you.
And I have a question on the wrestling. Is that 6, 7, 8 or just 8?
That'd be 6, 7, 8.
And that's usually, that's boys and girls or just boys?
It would typically be boys, but sometimes girls will compete in wrestling.
Okay. So you have 6th grade field hockey, 6th grade wrestling,
Yep.
7th grade field hockey. Okay. And then a combination 7 and 8 basketball. Okay. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yep.
Nancy?
Go ahead, Caroline.
I just like to hear a little bit more about this wrestling idea. It seems interesting to me that even 6th graders would enter that sport. Also, I'm sort of wondering in terms of the risk of certain sports, if that wouldn't be considered a very high risk sport from a COVID-19 standpoint. And also, I'm wondering what kind of participation you would expect at those levels for wrestling. Thank you.
Maybe Luke, you could speak about the survey that you conducted with students a little bit.
We did send out a survey to the students and try to identify the different sports or activities that they would like to see at the middle school. There were some obviously pretty popular ones, but as Bill already said, we tried to stay to that idea that what are opportunities that don't already exist for the kids? And, the high school does have a wrestling program. The recreation department in the past has run youth wrestling programs, which included 6th graders and I think even younger. But that over the last 3 or 4 years has sort of faded and it hasn't run lately. When run well, though, that recreation department program was a really successful program, including a tournament for middle school age students that took place in our gym. So we are excited about the possibility of adding wrestling because it is a sport. It is a sport that all 3 grades can participate in. Although 6th graders, seem a little bit young, the great equalizer in wrestling is that they only wrestle against somebody that's the exact same size as them. And so oftentimes that ends up being another 6th grader or a kid that is learning as well. So, something that, that we're excited about, and we think it's a good opportunity because it does expand something that the kids haven't been exposed to. Like Bill said, there are many opportunities, whether it's, legacy or town soccer or travel soccer, and plenty of basketball and Pop Warner and baseball. But if a kid chooses wrestling and there is a population of students where it'd be really, really good for, there's no opportunities for them. So we're excited about that, and we're continuing to also eyeball the future about other opportunities that would be helpful in kids transitioning to high school, but aren't opportunities that are offered in any youth programs like volleyball and things like that. So we'll continue to look to the future for other growth opportunities.
When we talked several times about this, and I have to say both gentlemen, I'm sure won't surprise you, were very professional, very thoughtful, and impressively intent on making sure that they were taking all things into consideration. In other words, there were opportunities for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. There were opportunities for male and female. There were opportunities for team and competitive sports. There were opportunities for very athletic driven students, but also those that could be incorporating some physical activity into their lifestyle in a more social way. So it was a great balance, and a great deal of work went into it. And I appreciate their thoughtfulness in this process. We did talk about adding potentially in the future, if we're able to do it in a very fiscally responsible way, if we are able to do it in perhaps a cost neutral way. There are some very creative things that we have been able to do. And we're going to be open to those opportunities. Volleyball is one of those that it's an opportunity for both boys and girls. It can be competitive, it can be social, it can be run as an intramural. So we will keep looking at that. Obviously, the budget constraints are an issue right now, but we want to always as we do with academics, with everything, we want to make sure we're maintaining a vision for the future and that we're not just stalling in all areas and putting things off because right now we can't afford it. This is a great example of reducing in some areas to add in other areas in a way that is neutral in terms of the funding, but enhances the experience for students. And so I really, again, want to commend them for forward thinking, even in a very difficult, excuse me, fiscal time, because this is when we have to be our most creative. And as far as the COVID concern, that's a concern for all of our sports, right? It's a concern for all of them. Again, we're thinking toward the future. It is in planning of having a program going forward. Of course, we would follow all the guidelines that we would for any other of our contact sports for the fall and for the winter. And even if it isn't played next year and it's played in the future, we're just going to use the same safeguards and obviously not hold it for a season if that's the case for any of our sports. But, you know, their planning is really long-term planning and not necessarily for the upcoming season only. So it's something that we're looking to put in place. And then of course we'll monitor it like everything else for in terms of the COVID issues that we have right now.
All right, I have a question. So we'll be losing 4 soccer coaches, is that correct?
2.
2?
2.
So it's a combination team, it's a 7-8?
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll be losing 2 basketball coaches.
Yes.
Now, wrestling, does the high school take this? Does a coach from the high school, or is this a different coach?
We would need a coach. 1
coach.
Yes.
Okay, and then there was talk about the ice hockey team. There is Jen can probably speak to this, but there's a middle school hockey team, but that is not school sponsored. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I'm aware of them using the name. They call it the Easton Middle School hockey team. I believe that there are players actually that are out of town that play on it. And I've had a conversation with Leisha about this, and I will follow up with them to request that they stop using that name. It's not there's no direct affiliation with Easton Middle School other than the students who may go to Easton Middle School that play hockey might play on the team. But it's just they've just used the name, but there's no other interaction that we have. Luke, you don't have any interaction with them, do you?
I mean, if a parent sends me an email or sends us an email in the morning with like an update on the games, I'll read it in the morning announcements. You know, but usually we just try to make sure, like we tell them, you know, as long as it's our students that we're, you know, sort of reading about. But I mean, they've been called. I mean, going back in time when it was Easton Junior High School, that was the name of the team. It was the Easton Junior High School team. So when we became a middle school in 2008, the name of the hockey team changed with it too. So.
And it's certainly reasonable for them to continue it seems as though their funding and their program works. It's just the naming. We're just going to make sure that they're not using the name of the school anymore, because it would be reasonable for a parent to presume that the school has oversight, that we use the same hiring practices, for example, for the coaching, that we hire and fire coaches, that we're involved in the funding of it, and liability as well. So they can certainly continue. It's just a modification of the name.
Yeah, and I think the teams are actually registered as OA1 and OA2. There's typically 2 teams. And it's, you know, that the origin of that is that, you know, there's some hand-me-down uniforms that have been kicking around for 10 years. Yeah, so I think it's
Orange Angels.
Orange Angels, there you go.
There you go.
We have a question. If
Go
I can
ahead.
read Chairman.
Go ahead, yeah.
The question is from Jack DeLuca. He says, in reference to 7 through 8 basketball teams, both boys and girls, will there be an equal opportunity for the 7th graders to participate?
It will be based upon a tryout process, and it's just a matter of, which kids are able to make the team. Unfortunately, in basketball, it's not unlimited. So we would try to carry as many kids on the team as we possibly could, but it will be based upon the coach's evaluation of the kids that try out and who feel the coach's evaluation of who will best compete on that team. So they will have an equal opportunity to compete for the team, but I'm not going to guarantee that there are going to be an equal number of seventh graders on that team.
Thank you.
Most coaches, I think, see the value in coaching next year's team this year. So I would imagine, a certain percentage of, say, the 15 slots would be for students that they see as maybe the next year's leaders. So usually that's how it works out.
Luke, would there be time or facility availability for, I know they run the March Madness thing, but for kids to play that aren't on another team, could they play basketball in the EMS gym under some kind of supervision that isn't a team?
Yeah, we do. We do have open gym that we staff and let the kids just play pickup games in there. But that's something that we do more in the fall and more in the spring. In the winter, the gym's pretty tied up because we'd go from if there's not a basketball game, there's usually a basketball practice. And, when our practice is finished, then the 9th grade team comes in and practices. And then when they finish, basketball comes in and takes over. So the gym space in the winter season is a little difficult, but certainly in the fall and the spring, we use it with open gym along with the fitness center.
In part of the considerations too were other opportunities in town. So you have Dana Barrows, of course, you have town ComRec, you have some traveling teams. So there are plenty of opportunities that we found in some cases, and in some sports we were actually competing sort of for time with students who were involved in some of the other leagues. So we're confident that anyone who wants to play will have an opportunity.
And we just had Jack DeLuca say thank you in the responses.
I'll yell to him from my room to his room then. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Matthews or Mr. Carroll? Michelle, go ahead.
I do. I'm following up on, I can't remember who asked this. I know you, Bill, you said we were losing 2 soccer coaches and we would be down 2 basketball coaches. We would need 1 wrestling coach. Would we need 2 field hockey coaches?
We are going to attempt to field 3 teams so that we can have 6th, 7th, and 8th. We don't know from year to year if we'll have enough players to field those teams, but our attempt will be to field 3 teams, and so we will need 3 coaches. So
the 4 for 4, so there isn't a cost savings or a cost increase? There
is a cost savings because of the difference in the cost of field hockey versus basketball. Basketball is an expensive sport.
Okay.
It's a lower number of students that are paying an activity fee that are on the team, and the travel costs and the referee costs are higher in basketball. So there are some savings.
Caroline, go ahead.
So I always talk about the past years and our practices. In the past, the school committee always had to vote if we were adding a specific team to the school district's sponsored team. I think some teams have been added in the last 2 years without our necessarily having taken a vote or having necessarily been entirely aware. But I do know that was the practice for at least 20 years. So I'm just going to ask a practical question. Does it make sense to make these decisions now when we don't even know if we'll be able to field teams like these, even field hockey, for example, in the upcoming year? When do we actually hire coaches? And at that point, do we have a contract that we're responsible for regardless? I'm just trying to ask a practical question about funding and kind of when that occurs in a time of total uncertainty that like we're facing now? Thank you.
That's a good question. We have had the conversation already and made sure that everyone is notified that if a season is not played, there is no payment. If a season is partially paid, there's partial payment. So coaches are only going to be paid on services rendered, if you will. So we've already made that agreement going forward. Oh, in terms of the vote. So I did tell Mr. Matthews that this and Mr. Carroll that this was purely informational, this meeting. So we can schedule a vote for our next meeting if you want to vote on this. But I'm not aware of any sports that have been added in the last couple of years, like you said, without a vote. Do you know of any, Mr. Matthews?
In my 8 years, we've not done that, Caroline. So I understand, but it would
Yeah, I
have
don't think we added
it
any.
would have been, if there were sports added without a vote, it would have been prior to me coming on board because there haven't been any added.
I don't necessarily think there were. I think that I may be thinking of some of the sports that we have that are run by volunteers or, you know, have had volunteer coaches.
Like frisbee
So
golf.
I might have assumed we had, you know, we were paying the coaches, but perhaps we weren't. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
think it's
Would you
like
like
the
that
fris-
added to
yeah.
next week's agenda?
What about adding a team?
No, a vote.
I don't think next week, maybe late.
Can I ask when, back to Caroline had asked this, but you know, by when would Mr. Matthews, you need to post an opening for a field hockey coach?
I would want to advertise it soon. You never know when the coach is going to be available and be able to show up, but certainly any discussion would be under these circumstances that there's some possibility that we don't play the season. We certainly hope that we will, but that would be a part of the interview process. But it's certainly, if we can get out there and identify some good candidates for the position, that would be very helpful at this point in time.
And I just want to remind that we're trying, it's very unknown for the fall. And so the way that the leadership team is trying to press forward with this to in any way have a sense of control over the situation is to plan as though we're ready for business and then pivot when we need to. So if we are in a position where we can play sports, even in the second half of the season, and we haven't prepared properly, we aren't going to be able to move forward. If we plan with precautions like we've done, where we get everything in order, we get it lined up, but we have collective bargaining agreements that they will be paid for the portion of a season that is in session, then we give ourselves a lot more flexibility to move with whatever comes at us. We are not obliged. We did already put that information out. It has already been received. And as Mr. Matthews said, certainly anyone coming in would be aware of that as well.
Jackie?
So I think there are two issues, and I'm not sure if you're talking about both of these together or separate. There's the issue of whether we can play certain sports because of COVID-19 restrictions, and then there's the issue of our budget. And you know, we could be fine with COVID-19, but maybe our budget wouldn't allow it. So I'm wondering if when you're having these conversations, if these parameters that they don't get paid unless there's services provided, is that only if COVID-19 doesn't allow it, or does that also include if we can't go forward with the sport because of budgetary problems?
It would only be because of COVID-19, and we wouldn't recommend it if we were going to be adding anything to the budget. Unless you wanted to cut from the sports budget at this time, this would be a little bit less than what we have already budgeted for sports.
Luke or Mr. Matthews, wasn't there a 6th and 7th, 8th grade field hockey team last year?
Yeah, we've had a field hockey team for as long as I can remember, to be honest with you. But the field hockey team was a school committee approved club. with a no cut clause. And that club, because it was deemed a club, it was operated by us. It's like Judy Canty controlled the budget, all the money in, all the money out, paid refs, and during that audit, it came out that that needs to fall under the realm of the athletic department. In the past, though, I will say, and the other, the contractual stipends and maybe what we were doing as a club don't exactly match up. But never in any of those years did the field hockey program run at a loss of money. If anything, there was additional money that helped pay for the banquet at the end of the year. So there was never any loss.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a packed program. It's 60 girls easy participating in all 3 teams.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then if you want to put it on the next agenda for a look at, we can do that, to see if you want it to be a sport or whatever we want to vote on. We can do that for the next meeting.
Nancy?
Michelle?
Oh, go ahead, Caroline. You can go first.
I was just going to say we could vote approval of the whole proposal, but I do think we need a vote. Anyway, thanks.
I didn't hear what she said.
She said that we could vote on an approval, but that she thinks that an approval is warranted, right?
But that a
Yeah,
vote on
and
the proposal.
for the
A
whole
vote on the,
proposal.
for the whole proposal.
Okay, thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, Bill, in starting up these new teams, are there startup costs? Like, would we have to order new uniforms and equipment? And are there one time, I know you said uniforms are on like a 6-year cycle. I'm assuming we don't have any for any of these.
Well, we should have uniforms because the program has been operating as a middle school program. It was school sanctioned, so it's my belief that those uniforms do exist.
It's
But you
like
would
if
need
you're
it for
thinking of the hockey team, for example, as if the hockey team were going to be folded into the school.
Yeah, the hockey team, I assume there's wrestling team uniforms.
Yeah, so good. Let's go back to hockey. We will have nothing to do with. So
Right.
we have no.
I mean
funding.
field hockey. I'm
The
sorry.
field hockey, I believe that the uniforms do exist, so I don't believe we'll have an expense for that. Wrestling, the cost of singlets for wrestling is very modest. I don't anticipate, and we have some stuff left over at the high school that could be used temporarily, just to kind of ease it in if we needed to, if we didn't have the funding available. We certainly have leftover singlets that could be used, again, temporarily. I'd like to have them have their own uniforms at some point in time.
But
For,
what about mats and stuff like that? Do we have all that? Mats?
Yes, we have a map.
Oh,
Yes, and we have the perfect room. The annex over at the middle school is an ideal place for.
Part of the reason we
The annex, when it was originally constructed, that was the wrestling room of the old Oliver Ames High School back in the 50s.
Part of the reason we held off on volleyball, other than the coaches, was even the nets and such. So we definitely considered things like equipment.
okay.
so for next week's vote, then can we just get a proposal that kind of, that summarizes the changes and the cost impacts?
Yes. Yes, I see
Yes.
people.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews, and thank you, Mr. Carroll. I don't know, when are you going to shave that beard?
Make it back to school.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Next
Thank
up,
you.
personnel changes. We have 2 retirements. Dr. Cabral?
We do. The first is Oliver Ames, custodian. I believe you have these letters. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the first is OA custodian Russell Hill. He's been with the Easton Public Schools for 33 years. He plans to retire on July 6, 2020, and you have his letter.
Okay. Dear Dr. Cabral, this letter is my official notification to you in the Easton Public Schools that I am retiring on July 6th. It has been a pleasure working in my role for the past 33 years, and I am grateful for many conversations I have had with teachers, colleagues, Mr. Paul, Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Brockman, and Mrs. Quealy. The various custodians I have had the pleasure of working with over my career help make the time and work enjoyable. I will miss the community at OA. I am grateful for the support I have been offered under various difficult times in my life, and I look forward with great anticipation to the next chapter in my life as I settle into retirement. Sincerely, Russell Hill. So I will comment that when I was at the middle school or the junior high, Russell was a custodian there. So he's a great guy, did a great job, and he's always got a story.
Yes, he's very social, very friendly, and you will recognize him most likely from the evenings for school committee meetings. He is
Right.
typically on duty when we have our evening school committee meetings at the Simmons Lecture Hall at the high school. And yes, he's been there longer than Caroline. That's saying something.
There you go.
Say that again, Caroline.
I just said that I've known him a long time.
So he's easy to talk to.
Hard
Do
worker. Yep.
I'm going to make a motion that we accept Russell Hill's retirement with regret.
Second, Durance?
All those in favor? Caroline?
O'Neill, yes.
Durance, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Okay. Dr. Cabral? No, you're on mute. Unmute.
Sorry. Doesn't matter how many of these I have a day, I still can't remember to do that. So the second and final that we have this evening is from an Oliver Ames teacher and department chair. Jim Sullivan has been with the Easton Public Schools for 22 years.
You know him?
He is an industrial arts teacher and he is currently the chair of the department. He plans to retire on June 30th. And you
Dear
have
Dr. Cabral, at this time, please accept this letter as official notice of my retirement from my teaching position at Oliver Ames High School. My final date of employment will be June 30th, 2020. I have thoroughly enjoyed every minute of my time at OA, and I know that I landed where I was supposed to be as a teacher. This moment is bittersweet. I am honored to have met so many people within the OA family, both faculty and students. I will miss them all. Thank you for the opportunities you have provided to me during my time teaching at OA. I truly appreciate your support and guidance over the past years. I am submitting my retirement to the MTRS and requesting a confirmation letter. Sincerely, James Sullivan. So he is a fantastic teacher. The kids are drawing amazing buildings and sketching, whatever they do, that industrial section. It's great. But he's also he's been the freshman baseball coach, but I don't know how long he's been there. It's been quite a while. And he's just a great guy, and we're going to miss him a lot over at the high school.
Yes, he is. He's a gentleman. He's very kind, professional. As the department chair, of course, he's worked with me and now with Chrissy on the curriculum leadership team. And once again, with these two veteran professionals, we are losing a lot of experience, but very happy for them in this bittersweet moment.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Caroline.
I was just going to say that I agree with Alicia. He's such a gentleman. And I think that he's played a very important part in a lot of kids' lives that, you know, might not necessarily have followed a traditional academic path, but were really engaged by what he had to offer.
Thank you.
I just
Oh,
wanted
go ahead.
to add, because I was able to work with him so closely through the curriculum leadership team, that Sully, as he's called up at the high school, he always brought such insight to the work that we did and the work that we continue to do. Even today, he was on our curriculum leader meeting, ready to provide some feedback. So he will be greatly missed by the Oliver Ames community, but also the Easton Public Schools. So thank you, Sully.
I make a motion to accept James Sullivan's retirement with regret.
Star, second.
All those in favor?
Neil, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Thank you. Next, vote to approve North River Collaborative Contract. Dr. Cabral.
Okay, we have been very fortunate to be part of a partnership with the North River Collaborative for the last couple of years. So whenever we have an opportunity for revenue, we certainly try to take advantage of it. We are in very difficult times right now. And one of those opportunities came when we identified 2 classrooms in one school that we could potentially use for a local special education collaborative. We were able over the years to add it to 3 classrooms. We are now at capacity everywhere. So unfortunately, we can't extend this collaboration. But as of now, the North River Collaborative, as I said, has 3 classrooms at Richardson Olmsted, and we're looking to extend their contract from August 2020 to August 2023. Not only is this a valuable revenue source for us, they currently rent the space at $15,000 per room. They provide their own staff, of course, and materials and resources. But not only the benefit of having this $45,000 a year, but also they have really become an amazing part of the culture at Richardson Olmsted. They have some students that are medically fragile students. They have students that are nonverbal. And between the students at Richardson Olmsted and the students from North River Collaborative, it has been extremely powerful to see the students collaborating with one another, greeting one another. They've started campaigns to support one another. And so just having this population in the building, matriculating with the students, has been invaluable. And it's a revenue source. So this, as long as this space is available, this is a win-win for us. And they have been wonderful tenants, if you will. They are very appreciative of the staff that has been supportive of them. And we would welcome them to come again for the next year. And they're thrilled to have the opportunity to be in the district. So this is to ask you, we're not changing any of the conditions of the contract, we're just extending it. And so this is to ask you to give me, the superintendent, authorization to sign this contract to extend this partnership for another year.
Okay, do I have or does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, do I have a motion to accept this contract with the North River Collaborative?
Wiseman, so moved.
Star, second.
All those in favor?
O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Thank you. Discussion and vote to accept extension to Whitson's contract. Dr. Cabral.
So Whitson's has been our food vendor, and we are looking to extend their contract. I'm sure Marilyn Gordon, who's here to talk about this with you, is going to, I hope she's going to be highlighting just how amazing they have been in this past closure of the schools with our grab and go program. They have really come through for us, and we are looking to extend their contract, food service contract, for 1 year, and we do need a vote to accept, but I'll let Marilyn comment on this. Marilyn, if you unmute, you can speak to the contract, and then they can ask any questions before a potential vote.
Sure. Hi, hello.
Hello.
Yes, well, we're very fortunate because our food service contract was up for, if as you recall, it's a 3-year it's a 1-year contract with 2 1-year extensions, and we completed our second 1-year extension last year. So this year was the year we were supposed to go out to a full-fledged RFP process, and we were just putting all of that together when we got when we were shut down. And there are a lot of districts in this same situation. So it's actually the federal government said that they're allowing us another 1-year extension so that we don't have to do the full bid process until next year, which is good. Gets a little something off of our plate here. And really, Whitson's has been outstanding. Jumped right in with the grab and go. We have a strange situation here because we have Whitson's employees and Easton employees, which can be, can be tough to handle, and they do an amazing job at that. Our food service director, Roberta Tamsanis, she's just great, works great.
Extraordinary, very flexible and accommodating.
It really is. And Scott Berry, the district manager, has been great. So this is so they just put the extension together like they would in a year, normally like it would normally be. And it is a 3% increase in the administrative and management fee. And but everything else is basically based on whatever income and expenses that the actuals that we have. So it does need a vote. And then we'll be back again next year with the full-fledged bid process.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved. Star.
Wiseman, second.
All those in favor of accepting the extension to Whitson's contract?
Yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
COVID-19 update, Dr. Cabral.
Okay, as always, we'll end with the instructional portion, but I'll start first with just a couple of updates. We have some serious concerns, of course, for the fall. We don't know what to expect. And so we are trying to plan with, plan with flexibility. So we're trying to be prepared, but not have 30 different scenarios. So we're really focusing on 3 possibilities in general, or generally speaking. One would be a full in-person start to school, or sometime in the fall, even if it's not at the very beginning. The second would be full remote version, similar to now, but naturally with adjustments. And the third would be some kind of hybrid. The hybrid, of course, is the most difficult to plan for because we don't know, we've done the full production before. We've done the remote before. We have not done a hybrid. And so in terms of preparing for things like in person, we are researching what other countries and other states are doing. We are putting together procurement lists for things like PPE or protective equipment, for our cleaning supplies. We've already begun ordering many things. We've talked about how we might go about some social distancing. So we are certainly planning for that. We have all summer to do that. We have already made our remote learning, our extended school year summer program remote learning, so that we don't have to worry about going in and cleaning the buildings and getting them ready. We, in terms of remote learning, obviously we'd be starting a school year potentially with people not having relationships. One of the blessings in this whole situation was that it was toward the end of a school year, and the teachers all knew their students quite well and had very established relationships, and it allowed them to be very helpful in terms of social emotional supports and knowing who they should reach out to and how they should reach out to them and what difficulties they might have academically and otherwise. This would certainly be a challenge. So we would need to revisit how we do this and how we provide new instruction for students. Again, we have the summer to work on that. And then the third, of course, would be a hybrid. We feel like if we properly prepare for being in school full time and the remote possibility, that we would then be able to do some kind of a combination of the two of them if necessary. And so that's what we're working on now. So as I said, I spoke to the chief. We're talking about ordering supplies. We are talking about ordering programs. We have CARES Act funding that we're going to be making pitches for certain equipment, positions, and so forth to help us navigate the learning next year in the fall. And then if we need to put together some kind of a hybrid plan, we're hoping to have 2 comprehensive plans that we could put together in some way. So that's how we're planning for the unplannable, frankly. In terms of funding, of course, we have significant concerns, and we've been talking about that. Our food service program, for example, it's self-funding. So if we are not selling food next year, we are not getting the revenue needed to pay our staff, which of course was an issue this year. And we're kind of limping through the end of the school year. So those are things, again, we'll have to figure out at the time. We'll have to see what is available to us, if there's federal stimulus money available or state support. But again, we can't necessarily prepare for every single eventuality because we just don't know what we're preparing for. But I do feel confident that if we do have a solid plan for being able to physically go back and for a remote learning platform, that between those two being prepared properly, I think we should be able to, with significant effort and planning, of course, be able to modify for whatever comes our way in the fall. I'm saying that not having ever thought we would be in a position like this. So as much as we can plan, we certainly are. So I'm going to toss it over to Chrissy in terms of updating you on instruction at this point. And then of course we can answer any questions. Well, we will entertain questions and try to answer them as best we can with lack of information.
Hi, everyone. As far as remote learning, there isn't really more updates from what we discussed last week. I did talk with our curriculum leaders this morning as we are starting to, like Leisha had said, Dr. Cabral has said, start to think about next year and what that might look like. We feel very fortunate that this occurred at the time of year when it did, due to so much content already being covered. But there was a lot of recognizing that if we were to start remote learning next year, how different it will look and has to look. Number one, like Dr. Cabral had said, because of not having the necessary relationships with the students, but also that, also that the kind of just the new teaching that needs to occur. So that's definitely a challenge. You know, our teachers have been experimenting, I should say, for lack of a better term, with the teaching of the power standards. If there's any new content that needs to be taught, we know that the commissioner has not recommended live sessions, which is something that we really need to look at, because you know, the quality of work that we are receiving, the teachers are very concerned about, because they want to be able to, the teachers want to be able to give the feedback and keep the students incorporating it into the work that they're doing. So those are some of there's a lot of thoughtful conversation. One of the things too that we discussed is how much professional development our teachers need in order to continue this remote learning. You know, our teachers were kind of thrown into this situation. Many of them didn't know the platforms. So we talked about what that might look like. And if this were to happen over, you know, where we come back in the fall, the type of professional development that we will need in order to make this as rigorous as possible and what is needed. So I just want to share with you also that the surveys, the schools have sent out surveys to families. At the next school committee meeting, I will be sharing with you some of the feedback. I will tell you it mostly is very positive, and there is a common thread that everyone wants live teaching. That is definitely a common thread throughout all grade levels and all schools. And also we are going to be sending out a staff survey for the teachers to give us some reflection on how it's been going for them and things that they would need, you know, if we get more data on what they would need to continue this work if needed, or, you know, in regards to the level of engagement for students and things like that. So that's kind of where we're at. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I know that Jackie had brought up at the last meeting some concerns about you know, kids wanting to see their teachers. I did go on some of the remote learning plans, and I did see some of the slideshows that had teachers speaking on them. I know, for example, one teacher in particular gave a quick tutorial on how to use a certain aspects of Google Classroom. So I just want to remind everyone that it might not necessarily be their own teachers in the videos. And that is due to level of comfort as well as other things that they're working on. So a teacher, if in a team, one teacher may be very comfortable with the tools, so they're the ones out there with presenting, where another teacher might be doing a lot of the research and planning the lessons and things like that to incorporate. So hopefully we can, you know, use this as a learning opportunity if this needs to continue in the fall.
Does anyone have any questions, Caroline?
Am I echoing as much with you as I am here?
Yes.
Not as
Sorry.
bad as you are on your own phone, no.
Not well. Okay. Chrissy, I was just wondering, do you know what the rationale of the commissioner was to discourage live teaching?
Yes. Yeah, so it's really interesting because we talked a lot at our curriculum leader meeting, and I've heard this with my colleagues, with my other assistant superintendent colleagues as well. Many of our students, they're not accessible during the day. You know, I had one curriculum leader share with me today that some of her students go to sleep at 6 o'clock in the morning and are waking up at 2 o'clock, 5 minutes before their Google Meet. Our teachers from 6 through 12 are making some of the Google Meets a little bit, they're encouraging it wholeheartedly more than others. But everyone's schedules, number one, are completely off. And while if we would need extreme parent support in order to get the kids up and going in some of the classrooms, but also the accessibility to the computers is not necessarily, you know, for example, I have meetings all day. My oldest is on his classes. My youngest is the one that sacrifices the live teaching because, or not the Google Meets that he's involved with, because 3 devices in our home, they kick people off. So it's very challenging as far as accessibility. It's challenging, like I said, due to schedules. And the benefit of the asynchronous learning is that a child can actually take the lesson and keep watching it over and over again. So there's a lot of benefits to that as well. So if for example, you know, I only use my own child because I sit with him and do some of the lessons. When he's watching a lesson from his teacher, he can pause it, he can rewind it, he can go back to something new that was learned. And that right now is what the commissioner is really focusing on, is how can we, you know, use this as a way to support our kids, and also understanding the different situations that everyone is in. We actually have many students at Oliver Ames that are actually working during the day. They've picked up extra shifts as essential employees at you know, whether it's the grocery store or Target. So I've been in contact with many of our teachers about that, as well as Principal West Paul, that this is that way when the children get home from work, they have the opportunity to see the same lesson that other students have seen as well. There
definitely are the benefits of asynchronous. As Chrissy said, students can pause, you during a math lesson or so forth. My biggest concern has been and continues to be equity, because the students that don't have access to the internet during the day, or the students that need to watch siblings while the parents are working, or the students that don't have a device until their parent is done working, those are the students that already have significant challenges, and their achievement gaps are already significant, and they're growing. In addition, it's whole class instruction, which is what is synchronous. You've got the whole class here, right? We don't do whole class instruction anymore. That is very antiquated. If you go into any classroom right now, you're going to see breakout sessions, you're going to see conversations, you're going to see discussion groups, you're going to see Socratic seminar, you're going to see small groups, you're going to see reading groups. You don't see whole group instruction anymore. It is very difficult to run an hour, never mind a school day, with every single person. There's a good reason why we don't have whole group instruction, because it isn't as effective for when you're trying to differentiate for individual student needs. When you're doing whole group instruction, as somebody who did it for many years, you've got to pull out, I was 20 pounds lighter when I taught. You have to pull out every tool in your toolbox. You got to be constantly moving all around. You've got to use proximity. You got to give hand signals. You've got to make agreements with students. If I tap my nose, that means I'm about to call on you. There are so many, it's so complex that it is very, very difficult to replicate online. Very difficult.
Right.
And so we're continuing to work on this. It's not that we're just abandoning it all together, but we really are trying to find ways that are not just going to sound good. Yeah, we have a whole group, everybody's on there. It is more about making sure that if everybody's on there, are they engaged? Do they understand what's happening? Are we able to give feedback? Are we able to hear back from the student? And, if you're thinking about elementary, for example, if they were to have a small group like this, 9 or 8 people and the teacher at once, you have to imagine they're going to have multiple ones for math. And then they're going to have multiple ones for English. And then they're going to have multiple ones for social studies. And then they're going to have multiple ones for science. They're not going to be able to meet with students more than once per subject anyway. And that would mean multiple hours per day. And right now, under the circumstances, for some very important reasons, the commissioner is only recommending that they are working half of a regular school day anyway. So we've really tried to look at this from all different angles, and we're just finding a lot of challenges, which doesn't mean we're stopping. It just means we need to continue working on it before we pivot and do something that we are not prepared yet for, and that might provide more challenge to our significantly already challenged students and create even larger achievement gaps. We're trying to keep everybody together right now and not have really gross inequities across different groups because of access.
Yeah, I also just want to highlight that our teachers are already identifying some of the challenges and thinking about, if this were to start in the fall, what changes would I make? So conversations around setting up your virtual classroom. What norms would you have? What would be the classroom rules? Those are the conversations that they're already having and thinking about, which I really commend them for. Because that is something that they're learning. One of our elementary curriculum leaders shared, she had her class on a Google Meet, and she had to just stop the read aloud because it turned into a show and tell, because there are so many distractions. Think about a 6, 7, 8-year-old sitting, and seeing their friend over there,
seeing themselves and making faces.
Like, hey! Yeah. And then seeing their friend and saying, what's that in the background? And it's a new normal for everyone. And so they're already thinking about, what's happening today. I think about what happened back in March and where we are today, the intense changes that have already been made in practice for the better have been incredible. I can only imagine if we come back in the fall, the changes that will occur, because there's a famous commercial that I love to show where it's a picture, it's a video of the plane being built as it's being flown. And that's kind of what's happening right now. We are flying the plane and we are building it as we are going. And our teachers are doing a great job kind of learning, reflecting, saying what they would do differently. So, I know especially Easton teachers are going to be doing a lot of reflecting. And I also want to say that, they also have a very well-deserved break coming up, because they were thrown into this. We all were thrown into this, and they need to kind of get rejuvenated. And I'm very happy that the summer is here, is almost here.
Jackie, you had a question?
I just wanted to say, I don't think my comment last time was necessarily about online learning. I think it was more going forward when there are maybe complex lessons that having a teacher do a video to help explain the slides and go over with examples makes it a little easier. And yes, they can obviously rerun the video as well, but I think sometimes having somebody talk it out with you, even if there's no back and forth, is helpful for the child to understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And our teachers recognize that too.
You were talking about asynchronous videos, but right now we were just talking about the synchronous one. So it wasn't attached to your comment. Sorry.
Right.
Okay.
Jen?
Yeah, I just wanted to just echo that, Chrissy, as you were going through the reasons that the commissioner listed, I can enthusiastically nod to every single one of them, because, my two I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and all of that applies with, the opportunity to work, right? So there are businesses that are relying on teenagers so that they can give their older employees who, it's not a safe environment, or they don't want to commit to work. They're helping keep some of these local businesses up and running, which is, school is first, but it's a great opportunity for the kids, and it helps them to feel, kind of important and empowered. Right. But, employers will schedule, and they're going, well, I have my, my check-in for this class at 11:30. Am I going to lose an 8-hour payday for a half-hour check-in for a class? So I know a lot of kids are making that choice, and might not necessarily be the best choice, but that's what's the reality of what's happening.
And Jen, honestly, some families don't have a choice. They need
right. That's true. Right. Yep. That's absolutely true. And then, just the, I'm on the internet all day for work. So the kids are getting kicked off, and multiple households, I can't control schedules at, another household. A lot of families are in that situation as well, trying to coordinate. So, so I definitely appreciate the challenges that come with trying to get kids scheduled to be all online with a live teacher at the same time, as beneficial as that could be. I think it's just not realistic. So
That was perfect.
Like that reporter. That's awesome. You're gonna go viral. And which is not to say we don't constantly try to improve. And I assure you that is exactly what they are all trying to do right now. So we will continue, and hopefully just keep reporting back to you enhancements all the time.
Yeah, and those very few districts that did try the live learning have reported out the severe challenges that they've been having. So it's, like I said before, we're all in a learning stage right now, as we're teaching, but we have a lot of reflecting to do, and revising.
Okay. Michelle?
Well, it was a comment, but I'm not sure. So in my district, and I don't know if it's something that is doable potentially if we have to do this again down the road, where lessons are recorded live, the only face in the picture is the teacher, for privacy issues of the students. But there is still some benefit of the students asking questions that the teacher is responding to. And even if our students are seeing that 4 or 5 hours later, it still might have been a question that student had come up with. And so there still is, it's kind of an in-between between a live and a completely teacher-driven with no interaction. So maybe the question that's going on in that student's head, somebody else asked, and at least they have some type of interaction. I don't know.
Yeah, and we do have many teachers that are doing small group sessions. You know, I'm thinking of our reading interventionists, our reading specialists, our special education teachers. They're providing the smaller group live sessions that are, you know, according to students' IEPs or the intervention they've been receiving. I'm just talking more generically about the whole classroom instruction and some of the challenges that does face. I know many teachers that have adjusted their own schedules to meet the schedules of their students. Some teachers have
who hadn't done
adjusted
any videos at all that are now starting to produce videos and become the technology. So yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody? All right, thank you for that update. And now,
I don't know if Caroline has a question.
Go ahead, Caroline.
I'll pass. The echoing's driving me crazy.
Okay, you can type it into Q&A. Type your question into
That's
Q&A.
true too.
All right, budget update, Jessica Brown.
Okay, so we had asked, and you, as usual, delivered. It was great and very helpful to us. We had asked for an executive session to get some guidance going forward on how to approach some of our significant budget issues. And just to review a few of them, one was to keep elementary class sizes, pre-K through 5, to keep class sizes to 25 or less, to review things like sports, which we did, and you of course had the presentations this evening. We looked at activities, as I stated previously for the sports fees. Activities also is challenging because we don't know if they'll take place, and we don't know how many families are going to be in a position where they have more financial vulnerability and perhaps will qualify for free or reduced costs for services. And so increasing is, we may find that we're providing a lot of that for free and working at a loss anyway. So there really is no security that if we increase fees, we're going to generate any more revenue. So it's kind of a difficult time for us to do that. And we did just raise them, but of course we're in a very difficult budget situation, but it's just a little too hard to predict if that will create any sort of relief for us. We talked about, in terms of our bargaining units, we talked about potential concessions. And so we came up with figures. Marilyn came up with a chart of figures of what different concessions would equate to, and we provided that to all bargaining units. As you are aware, the central office leadership and principals of every school are taking a 2% freeze, salary freeze next year. I'm taking a full salary freeze next year. And then we also came up with some early resignation incentives for each unit. And we're in the process of talking to unit leadership and then pushing out that information. And that will be an opportunity for people to decide if they want to take advantage of a bonus from FY20 to perhaps participate in early resignation for FY21. That's obviously a very personal choice. Some people may wish to try some other line of work. They may decide to retire. There's lots of possibilities. If that works for someone, we hope it will be a mutually advantageous agreement. So that is something that we try to put together creatively and as a final cost saving measure, because all we really have left after that, as we've been discussing at these budget updates every week, is all we have left after that are positions. And so we did identify at least a dozen positions across units that we are considering for layoffs. Now, how many of those will be finalized is going to depend on our savings. So we have been looking at all those items. One last item that actually I wanted to just bring to your attention again, because we weren't sure, we had brought this up, but we wanted to see if there was discussion on this. If this was a definite, we could move forward and let people know about this. And that was moving the bus routes from 1.5 mile pickup to 2 mile pickup. So the state law is a 2 mile pickup. We pick up students inside that radius. If we extend it to the 2 mile radius, we do believe that we're estimating that we will be able to save one bus, which is approximately $80,000. If not, if students still want to participate, they can take part of the pay and ride program. Of course, we can never predict how many people we can estimate how many people will impact, but we don't know how many people will take advantage of it. And so we are looking at that as a potential savings of $80,000. And so we wanted to get your input on that. We looked at electives at Oliver Ames High School and specials at the middle school. Again, those would result in layoffs. So other than all the items that I listed, the remaining savings would be in layoffs. And of course, since that is our last choice and what we would always try to save first, we are adding up all the savings elsewhere. I just want to get that final determination from you about the 1/2 mile to the 2 mile. And then we are going to continue our discussions with the town, because they are continually updating their revenue and expense lines to see exactly what number we have to get to. We feel as though there will definitely be layoffs. We just don't know exactly how many. And so we have not issued layoff notifications yet, but we do anticipate a lot of movement in the unit, a lot of bumping, if you will. And so we have started the conversation about who might be moving where. The final part of that is when we have the layoff. So when everyone, if a teacher's position is being eliminated and they're a veteran professional staff with professional teacher status, they have the opportunity to bump into another position. And so we're going to embark on that work now. When that is finished at the end, that's when we determine who do we not have positions for. And then hopefully we'll have our figures as up to date as possible. And then that's when we will determine layoffs, definitive layoffs. We will, I am confident we will be moving into the new fiscal year without a state budget. So that is, that's new for me. That is new for a lot of people. I think we're going to be moving into a 1/12 budget in July and perhaps 1/12 budget in August. Unfortunately, virus rules right now. So we don't know between the virus, if it progresses, if we have a resurgence, and again, we talked about consumer confidence, if we have a V bounce back of the economy as opposed to the other many alphabet soup scenarios that are projected. But we are moving forward as of now with a projected 8% decrease in state revenue. If you are paying attention to media outlets and economists and accountants in legislature and legislative hearings, you will see that there are still several experts who are predicting upwards to 20%. So we're talking about a scenario where we're putting in all these things, we're putting all these things in place with an 8% presumption of loss. If we go to 10, 12, 15, 20, it's going to be considerably worse. And unfortunately, we would typically know by July 1st what that situation is, but this is obviously a very atypical situation. And so we may not know literally, we could have changes to the budget as late as the fall, which for our business is unconscionable, because what you don't want to do is leave a professional without a position in the fall, where it's going to be very difficult for them to find some other form of gainful employment in their field. And so unfortunately, what is probably going to happen is we are going to default. And when there is a question and we see evidence that it's moving in that direction, we may have more layoffs than ultimately necessary, because we just want to be as ethically and professionally conscious of our colleagues as possible. But we're cutting as close as we possibly can with the very lack of information we have. I've never spent so many hours every day in so many meetings leaving with no answers. And that's exactly, I mean, you can see that on your own televisions. And so that's what's happening with us. And we're just doing the best that we can with the limited information we have. So it's still a rather bleak outlook in terms of the budget. But as of now, since we have not received information about any other concessions, and we do not formally have any early resignation incentive agreements, we are going forward with what we anticipate for layoffs for now. Until we learn anything different, we're going to keep moving forward with that. We may not, and so that's why we have to move forward.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do. So with the two retirements that we accepted tonight, I know those weren't in our projections that we discussed in the past. Does that, and I don't know if this can be answered in this session, does that have any impact on, I know custodial unit or anything like that? Is that anything that helps, or, or will we have to?
We had actually had a heads up about the custodial position, so we did already work that into the budget.
Okay.
In terms of the second position, that is going to, we're going to have to determine whether that position is going to be filled or not. Because as we hone in our numbers, that's an example of something where we may need to absorb the retirement. It doesn't result in a layoff, which is extremely important to me and to us. And so we have not made that decision yet, because we're that close in our numbers that something like that is yet to be determined. Fortunately, that would be by attrition and not an additional layoff, but those are a couple things that we still are yet to determine. But the custodial savings was already factored in.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Cabral. Okay, public comment. Chrissy, anybody on the Q&A?
Yes, we have one from Jane Martin. Is there concern about losing young educators, those that are new to the profession? And what are the implications of that much further in the future, 15 years from now?
Thanks. So that is a great question. And it's one that people who are not really intricately involved with education tend to understand as much as other industries. It is extremely difficult to maintain a reputation as someone who enjoys high quality candidates like Easton does if you are involved in massive layoffs. And it typically takes about 7 years after 1 year of massive layoffs to kind of build back your programming, build back your educational force, if you will, your personnel, and certainly your reputation. As you can imagine, it is very competitive. We are about we are at the middle of the road in terms of compensation, and Easton has some very well-known challenges in terms of funding. for its district. And so people know that if they are going to work here, it is, they have some challenges that some other districts don't have in terms of resources and materials and breadth of offerings. And it really is, our success and our students' success really is a function of our dedicated professionals, as I've said many times before. And we're very fortunate to have the staff that we have. And so compromising that is certainly, we have seen in the past when there's even conversation about budget cuts in the future, we have had people resign. And so you don't necessarily just lose your junior staff that are pink slipped, if you will, or as a result of a reduction in force. You tend to start seeing you're losing them in other areas as well, even places you hadn't even talked about potentially cutting before. And it's a really tricky industry because this is our hiring season right now. It is very difficult, almost impossible, especially if you have a couple of years experience and you may be more expensive than a brand new candidate coming out of college. It is almost impossible to get a job anytime after mid-July. August gets very difficult, and forget it in September. And so if people are uncertain and you create an air of uncertainty because you're so close in your budget, you will have people who will go to other districts. And, you know, COVID has hit everyone, but COVID is not the sole cause of our economic issues right now. We have, it's very well known to this group and probably people that are watching, we've been talking about this for several years. We have had a structural deficit problem for many years now, for complex reasons that all of you have heard many times before. And so that, combined with us trying to rebuild our stabilization fund, and then of course the loss of revenue due to COVID, has created really this perfect storm. So our neighbors are not, many of our neighbors are not in the position we are now. I think I told you last week, I was talking to one local superintendent who said, well, you know, I said, we are looking at cutting about $1 million from our budget. And this superintendent said, well, we are too. We're just going to not put $1 million into OPEB this year. That's how we're going to do it. We don't, that is not something that we have that luxury. Or, you know, some of our neighbors are using gate receipts for, you know, they have venues and things that we just don't have in Easton. So it's a very complex issue, and there's a lot of competition out there. And so you can imagine a person's going to want to go where they feel secure. And when we start laying off people, we see that it has implications for several years, and it takes a while to build it back up. Oh, I did want to mention one other. So I hope that answered the question, but if not, please ask a clarifying question, and I'm willing to elaborate. I'm more than happy to elaborate. But one of the things, two things, and maybe you can have a conversation about it now. I just wanted to make sure we address that bus issue before we move off of the budget, because it is something that we need to work into our figures. But also, one thing that was brought up were the professional development days that we recently added contractually. That is about $105,000, $107,000 in potential savings, but of course it would mean eliminating one of the professional development days for our professional staff. So two potential considerations for you.
So you want, I thought maybe during the executive session after this, can we put the bus thing in on that and then with everything else, or do you want a bus decision right now?
No, the executive session is for issues regarding the budget that have contractual implications.
But don't all these issues together, like one affects the other? If we do one, it could influence how we go in another direction. I feel like they're all really intertwined right now.
That I agree with Jackie that, you know, we could say yes to changing the bus amount, but if, you know, if we have a teacher thing going on and we have a whatever. They're all intertwined. I don't think that we can just right at this minute, pull it out separately and say, okay, we're gonna go to 2 miles. I just think
agree.
we have to, I think it has to be talked about a little bit.
Right. But we do have to have an open discussion on it, and
Okay,
want to talk about it in relation to some contractual decisions. We can certainly do that, but you can't make a decision on this in executive session. We're gonna have to come back and talk about it in public.
I see.
No, am I still on? Yeah, I agree with that. I just feel like I'm not ready to make a decision on that yet until we have all the facts about everything else.
Okay.
I agree with Jackie and Nancy's comments too, that it's not necessarily isolated decision, or I'm ready to make that decision because all the other pieces are still floating around.
Okay. Chrissy?
Chrissy.
Okay, we have a comment, but I also saw that there was a hand raise. I think it was a Karen Rogers hand raise. So I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question and you're listening, please type it into the Q&A. Do you want me to read the question now?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is from Michelle Casey. Can you please clarify if the teachers' unions have been asked directly to take a 0% increase in pay for this upcoming fiscal year? I know factually that all town unions are being asked to do this, and some have already agreed while others have not yet decided. Given the economy and the outlook, I would hope that this is being encouraged and that all unions would agree to do this and not just a few. What would the savings be if teachers agreed to take a 0% increase?
So I have met with the entire union leadership in the district, 6 units, and I did provide them, and I don't have it in front of me right now. I apologize, but I did provide. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I did provide all of the unions with how much different concessions would total. So for example, a 1% freeze, 2% freeze, 2.5% freeze, step freeze, things like that. I have not had a unit tell me an outright no. I have not had a unit tell me that they're making a concession. So I can't say that they have refused. I cannot say that they have refused. Right now, I am not aware of any unit concessions. But I cannot say that they have refused because no one has told me they refuse. But that information was provided to them as part of my budget presentation. And they were also informed that the central office administration, myself, and the principals were putting freezes on our raises for next year. I apologize, I don't have those figures handy.
Should we also just clarify the difference? I believe, if I recall correctly, that on the town side, the contractual increase was 2%, but on the school side, it was 2.5%. Okay,
Yes.
Right. So an equal concession would not necessarily be a 0% raise. An equal concession would be a 0.5%.
The 2% concession, 2% freeze.
Right. Yeah.
So I am taking a 0%. I am taking a full 2.5% freeze.
Mhm.
The principals and central office administrators are taking a freeze comparable to the town increase, which is a 2% freeze.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
The question Michelle Casey said again, were they provided with the savings of 0%? Sorry, she said 1%, etc.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think it was, I want to say it was 0%, 1%, and 2.5% were on the chart because if they had 1%, they could easily extrapolate 2% and so forth.
Yeah, if it's the same one that you gave us, it was step only 1%, 1.5%, and 2.5%.
2.5 meaning 0. And I think
Right,
that's
yeah.
what she's asking. Okay.
Yep.
Is that it on Q&A?
Yeah, nope, one more, sorry. Great, thank you, from Michelle Casey.
Did Karen Rogers have a question?
No, she said it was a typo, a button, she pressed the button incorrectly.
Okay, that happens.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent notes.
I don't have any additional this evening.
Okay, Assistant Superintendent notes.
I also don't have any additional this evening.
Okay, thank you. Caroline, school committee notes, you get to start.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'm sure everybody's been doing a deep dive into the new guidelines that were issued by
CDC.
Yes.
There were general guidelines issued a couple of weeks ago that were not that helpful, but the really detailed ones were just released on Friday, I believe. Anyway, I think there have been a huge number of very creative discussions, ideas out there about how one would adopt a sort of hybrid approach. And I'm just wondering who all is really talking about these kinds of ideas and possibilities as they might relate to Easton. What is the team that is kind of in place to really kind of iron out some of the potential actions that we could take, some of the, potential programs we could put in place, etc.
So that's a great question. We have been talking about it as a cabinet and an executive team. And we discussed this week that we are creating a committee for, we don't have the name yet. We talked about, a repopulation committee or a reopening committee. And we've identified several subgroups of this committee. And again, I apologize, I don't have it in front of me right now. We were going to present it when it was finished, but we have certainly facilities and equipment such as PPE. We have social emotional supports and student services, nursing, and so forth. We have obviously the education and instructional. We have communications. And I know, Chrissy, I'm missing one. Oh, financial. We had one
Right.
for financial in particular.
Technology.
In terms of finding the applicable grants and managing the CARES Act funds. And then finally, technology in terms of, how instructional technology, but also how we're getting devices back from students, how we're going to potentially be doling out more devices if necessary. So we have several subcommittees that are each going to be run by an administrator that are going to report back to the full committee. But we are working right now on the makeup of the full committee because I actually talked to the chief today about it. We're going to have town Board of Health representation, emergency services representation, and of course, school committee representation. We're just coming up with the makeup of that committee right now. We're really trying to get through the closure of school and the budget and layoffs right now. That's kind of our triage point. And we're speaking of that sort of in an ancillary way and going full force as soon as we get this stuff under control. But that's a great question. We are working on that.
I apologize.
Hold on, Jack. Hold on. No, Caroline. I'm sorry, Caroline. Hold on 1 second. Go ahead.
I apologize if I sound somewhat incoherent because the echo is so strong on my side that I can barely make out what I'm saying. But I did want to bring up a couple of things that I've been reading a lot about, which is, obviously how do we make the schools safe, and in particular, how do we disinfect or put in place practices that will reduce the risk of infection. And one of the things that comes up a lot is bathrooms, and the fact that bathrooms are among the most challenging areas to address in terms of keeping kids safe. So I'm hoping that there's a group discussing that kind of thing, because that's going to be so critical. And I do have, I don't want to go into details about the ideas that I have because I'm echoing so much. But the other thing I wanted to bring up, a citizen contacted a couple of us to ask about what kind of disinfectants we're using. And apparently the most common type of disinfectant is something called quat ammonium. And there is some risk of exacerbating asthma and creating other problems with these kinds of disinfectants. They also have carcinogens in them, evidently. So I was wondering if we are looking at the safest possible disinfectants to use in our schools, because obviously we're going to be using massive amounts of whatever product we end up using. And I don't know if we have purchasing agreements with the region in place, or if we have other kinds of obstacles to selecting non-carcinogenic or whatever products. But I was wondering if we could at least have that as a kind of bookmark to consider.
Yeah, so one of our subcommittees that I mentioned is facilities and sanitation. And I believe we're ahead of the curve on that one, to be honest with you, because we were really well prepared in the spring when this originally happened. We made use of the electrostatic cleaners that we had talked about, and we have since given them to the town, and they've been using them everywhere. They disinfect their ambulances with them. So we did look into the ingredients when we first got them. I was assured. I spoke to the vendor directly. I don't have the name in front of me, but it is a food grade sanitizer. And as I said, the fire department is sanitizing the interior of their ambulances with it right now. So we are good in that area. We have a lot more to discuss, of course. We have already put up the plexiglass coverings in our offices in each of the buildings. So we have done a lot of work on it, but it kind of sounds to me, Caroline, like you're volunteering for the facilities and sanitation subgroup, just saying.
That's what I heard.
We have a question.
Go ahead.
The question is from an anonymous attendee: how many people are present in the meeting? So if you don't mind if I answer that, because I can see we have 22 participants, but I also want to remind this person and everyone that this is also being shown on Facebook Live, and more people view it there as well.
Yeah, we don't
have that number.
And it is recorded also.
Right.
It will be recorded. I don't know, maybe on Facebook Live it says how many people? I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Michelle. Well, did you have?
Jackie has a question.
That's okay.
Comment.
Michelle can go. I can go after Michelle.
I was just going in order, but go ahead. You had your hand up. Go ahead, Jackie.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Oh, no, I just, I would appreciate it when all these committees do eventually get going. If we could, I know the tendency is to kind of make all, get everything together and then present us at the end, but it would be helpful, I think, if we're involved during the whole process, even if there's committees that we're not on, to get general updates about what they're thinking and where they're going with things.
Absolutely.
There's
Yes.
a mouse in my house. But just to, if we can get, frequent updates on what's going on, that would be
Absolutely.
helpful. I'm gonna go check that out.
Jackie, while you have the microphone, do you have any school committee comments?
No, not at this
No.
time. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle.
Mine were just some general comments. I've heard feedback on the appreciation for the new family portal. I personally have not checked it out yet, but I'm hearing a lot of positive things about it. So I look forward to looking at it. And then I'm not sure if this is a comment or if it's even something, if for not a clarification, but I think it's important that as we're going through this budget and we're talking about cuts here or there, potential layoffs, that the sports conversation that we had this morning earlier, can I comment on that? Can I go back to that a little bit?
Yes.
Is that appropriate? Okay. That it's not perceived as, from what I heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that while we might be hiring for coaches, we're also not hiring for other coaches. And there actually was a net savings in this transition. And I think it's important that it not be seen as we're hiring for new people and we're talking about other cuts and other potential layoffs. And I think
Right.
that's
We actually, right. And people are, and that's an important point, and that's why I brought up postings a couple times already. People are going to see that we are posting for positions. Some positions must be refilled. So for example, we have multiple speech language pathologists that are retiring this year. Those positions need to be refilled. We have mental health positions that are open. Those positions need to be filled. So where we are able to eliminate by attrition, we do, but that's not always possible. It's really based on the needs of the district. And so people will see postings, but that is because we have examined that area and we are unable to absorb losing someone in that area. So without making a determination that we want to eliminate sports, this is a lateral move to meet an auditing mandate, but also have some savings. Again, if you wanted us to eliminate anything, we can go back and look at that, but without that directive, we are not adding anything, we're swapping, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
That was just my comment. I wanted to make sure that was a clear point.
So Michelle, you're all set? Okay. I don't have anything at this time. Jackie, you're all set. Jen?
Sure, just a couple of things. I just want to let people know sort of that as school committee members, we have opportunities to engage with other school committees, and so Mass Association of Schools Committees has set up 2 webinars next week. One is a discussion with Congressman Jim McGovern. So he's in the House of Representatives, and I've signed up for that, and hopefully we'll be able to attend. I think any opportunities that we can get in the ear of legislators about the importance of funding that we need to get through this crisis and other things is a good opportunity. They're also offering a webinar on the psychological impact of the pandemic on communities of color that I'll hopefully be able to attend. I think it's a really interesting topic and another good opportunity, again, to talk to our colleagues in other communities around the state. And also wanted to also remind people that there is another virtual town hall with Teresa Skinner next Tuesday at 4 p.m. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Okay, and no other Q&As, right? No? Okay, and
No.
all right, and then, okay, we'll leave it at that. I'm going to make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the food service unit and collective bargaining for the Easton Educators Association's Unit A, B, and paraprofessionals and the Southeastern Public Employees Association Secretarial, Clerical, Food Service, and Custodial. And that, in my opinion, having the discussion in open meeting would be detrimental to the bargaining position of the school committee.
Second, Wiseman second.
Jackie second, okay. All those in favor?
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman,
Caroline
yes.
said O'Neill, yes. I'm sorry.
Star, yes.
Okay, so we will not be returning to open session. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.